This is information that I've kind of culled from the internet, from a few different sources that you guys are all going to find. My job today is not to explain to you, here's exactly how you should treat, when you should treat, this is what you should do because this is what we want you to do. My job is to convince you that mites are a big problem. And in order to do something about a problem, you need to define how big your problem is. So when you, if you have Varroa, you might want to check on that. Yeah, I know, terrible. The jokes don't get any better, promise you. So Varroa mites are not native, and they were introduced accidentally, and they've become this destructive pest. So they do suck the hemolymph of the bees, they transmit diseases, and they're going to generally weaken your colony. So this is kind of your standard definition of this is what the scientists think Varroa mite can do. So on another site, looking up some of the information, they actually think that they are the most serious pest of the western honeybee colonies and a primary cause of the honeybee decline. So this guy Dietman did some research and said he thinks that Varroa is the #1 threat to western honeybees. And he said if they were not treated to kill the pest, they would likely die within 1 to 3 years if left unmanaged. It is recommended that you test. You have to know what your number is. If you don't, and you just say, well, here's what I've decided to do to treat, you can treat and you never know, did I fix my problem? Or did I have a problem and am I over-treating? Am I doing something that my bees don't need? One of the guys from Scientific Beekeeping, he writes pretty well, so I stole his phrase, was any monitoring method should be quick, simple, easy, inexpensive, reasonably accurate, and doesn't involve counting above the number of fingers that you have on your hands. No one wants to take off their shoes in the bee yard. It's just a bad idea. So, from what I can glean from other information from my own experience with my hives, low infestations of mites become big problems for your hive. If you have one mite that deposits their eggs into a cell or crawls in there with that larva, you can get up to 7 or 8 mites that come out of that single cell. So for every one bee that's born, you can get between 6 and 8 mites that come out of there. So their growth curve and their population curve is way higher than the bees. So left unchecked, they will overwhelm the ability of your queen to produce new bees. So failure to manage your mite infestation is not only going to put you at risk, it creates what I've heard phrased as a mite bomb. So now your hive is the nexus. As your hive begins to crash, the other bees around come in and they rob out the honey and they rob out the resources. And now they're picking up mites on the way out. So they were given a gift, a parting gift by your departing hive. And that then spreads that cycle all around, and now we have more colonies that maybe were more isolated but are close enough. Now they have mites. So some of what I found showed us that you can get several things you might be able to see as a problem. So you can see that you might have deformed wing virus. You might have parasitic mite syndrome, and you might just notice that your bees are small and they don't really thrive. Deformed wing virus is an example here. They had a guy who took a bunch of pictures, and I thought, that's great, I'll show them, because there's no way I'm going to find that in my hive and take my own picture. But you can see that the wings are kind of cracked and broken off, but more than just wear and tear of an old bee, these are deformed. It almost looks like they were born melted. And so that's going to be one of the things that bee isn't going to work for you. And so now you're losing workforce. You're losing your hive's ability to collect resources. So parasitic mite syndrome, and reading on this, it is visually sometimes hard to tell the difference between this and like foul brood. Foul brood has much more of a smell and some other things. And this one talks about being able to, it does include sunken brood with mites present, it passes that foul brood stick test where you take a little stick, a toothpick, and you scoop into that cell, and as you draw it out, it'll rope out, and it'll rope out, an inch or two, and that kind of sticky gooiness is an indicator of foul brood. This, when you find these dead larvae in there, they don't rope out. They don't have that gooiness. And so you can possibly say that might be parasitic mite syndrome. So they give kind of the chewed pupa, holy pupal cappings, they're not Catholic, and white mite frass on top of the cells. And he said it's not visible in the photo because of the angle. So you're going to see mite poop is, I think, what frass is normally meant to be. So there are a few methods of testing. So again, my goal is to get you to test. So we could start with the ostrich method of testing, which is to do nothing. We don't test, I don't have a problem, everything is fine, I'm hoping for honey at the end of the year. That is the ostrich method. It's developed in Germany, but it isn't recommended. I'm just telling you that's not the one that I'm going to fall on as a good recommendation. And let me back up here. We went to, sticky boards. All right. So I found that there was this guy from Scientific Beekeeping. He had quite an extensive list of what he thought sticky boards could do for you. A sticky board is used under a screened bottom board. It slides in. It's got a sticky surface. You either oil it with something or you come ones that have a stickiness to them. You've got one over there. So afterwards, there's one you can pick up, look at. Bees will groom. The mites will fall off. So one of the problems with this is the bees aren't able to get all of the mites off. And what drops over time is not always representative of all the remaining mites that are there. So the sticky board is going to require you to go in, put in a new sticky board, and then you have to come back in 24 hours or 48 hours, whatever your timing is going to be, and you're going to see what naturally falls off the bees. Depending on the cycle of what's hatching out, depending on how many nurse bees you have in that area, depending on what your hive is doing, that mite drop is going to be different over time. So you can't say that, well, my mite drop, a 24-hour mite drop on Monday of last week and a 24-hour mite drop on Monday of this week is going to be different depending on the weather, depending on what your bees were doing. It's going to change that. So that's not always a really accurate way of telling how many mites you have. Now, if you see mites on the board, that means you have mites. You just can't tell how many. So he points that it is tedious, time-consuming, and late season you have to get a lot more of them because there's less of them dropping off. So he says, the older you get, the harder they are to see. So there's a detraction there. So if you guys have ever looked up anything from Minnesota Bee Lab, they make a kit. You can buy it from Dayton. It is their easy powdered sugar kit test. It comes, and this is my DIY one. Andy has some nice looking ones. Glass jar, screen, bees inside, sugar, shake the heck out of them, anger them, wait for the mites to fall off, dump the now angry bees away from you somewhere, and then pour the sugar out, and now we have to put water on the sugar to dissolve it, so now you can see the mites that are in there. It actually works really well, as long as you remember to bring the plate that you were going to dissolve the sugar on, and so you can see them. You forget that, it's very hard to count them. Doesn't really work in your hand. Tried it, didn't do so well. So, found myself some safe organic powdered sugar that doesn't have the starch in, that's all bad. My measuring tools to get the right amount of bees and the right amount of sugar, and then I normally have a little water jug that goes with it all. So it is easy to make your own test kit. It's fairly simple, it's straightforward, it works. It doesn't directly kill the bees that you're putting in here, but you need to pour them full of sugar, shake them up, and leave them sit for, some of the tests indicate 3 to 4 minutes. So they're going to get hot, they're going to get uncomfortable, and they're trying to get all of these, they're going to start grooming and getting some of these mites off. Mites oftentimes will tuck in under the abdomen, so they're in under in the armpits, they're in different places. Yes, you can see a mite on the back of the thorax of a bee, but the problem is a lot of them are on the underside, and if they don't groom all of that, if they don't get all of them out, your count per 100 or 200 bees isn't going to be as accurate. So you're really dependent on that time frame of how well do they get it. Jonathan just explained that he had some humidity problems and put the sugar in there and firmly made cement with bees sitting on top of it. And so the bees didn't make it, and nor did the mites, and they were impossible to count. So, yes?
How do you get a quarter cup of bees?
Well, you whistle. You can train bees, and they just crawl in. What I do is, and I use this one. I'll bring this along with me. I'll take a frame. One of the recommendations. This is not supposed to kill your bees. You still don't want to put the queen in there. So you are supposed to locate the queen, or at least ensure that she's not on the frames that you're shaking. You probably want brood frames and not super frames. If you take the bees from the supers, they're going. The mites are not as resident there. They're going to be on some of those bees. The field bees will have mites on them, but the mites hang around the brood because they want to dive in right at the right time before that cell is being capped. So they're going to go in there, and their life cycle starts right as that bee is being capped off. So they, under cover of darkness, they do their dastardly work. So I'll grab a frame, shake it in here. Now I've got some bees. I can slosh them into the corner. I can pour them into my thing. I can scoop it up and go, that's about 100 bees. And what is it? 100 bees per half cup, I think?
Quarter cup.
Quarter cup. So it's 200 bees per half cup. So that's the measure I was using. Anybody need that? Slide it down that way. So you can use something like that. Yep. I have seen some of the videos where they'll take a frame, hold it up, and they just take the cup and they drag it over the top of the bees and kind of causes them to fall into the cup. It's a pretty cool trick. I haven't tried it yet. But on the video it looked great. So he's able to kind of go down the frame a few times, and now they're going to fall into his cup. He's going to measure them out and dump them into whatever he's got. So this is not a destructive way of sampling, which for a lot of people, that's, who wants to kill 200 bees every time you're going to go out and sample. One of the reasons why you would consider an alcohol test, and I think I missed a slide, but one of the reasons you would consider an alcohol test, it is destructive, but it gives you a higher accuracy, and there have been some papers that I read that indicated they're fairly close. So if you get a mite drop of 7 or 8 out of your 200 bees with a non-destructive method, you might get upwards of 8 to 9. It's not a massive difference, but if your threshold to treat, what you decide to do is somewhere in there, now your sample you have to account for that. So a lot of times in the sugar one, they just add 10% to it, and that was how they kind of accounted for the difference in their practice. So Dayton, and I'm a sucker for gadgets, I'm an IT guy. Dayton came out with this year. This is out of a company, Vito Pharmaca, or Pharma. They're out of France. They say they're a pharmacy essentially for bees. They make a few different products. This is one that I picked up. I want to think it was your standard $19.99. It consists of the inner white basket, this case, and then you fill it with windshield washer fluid. So the alcohol in that windshield washer fluid would kill those bees. So you put a little bit in, you get your sample in the white cup, and it's got markings on it to tell you how many is 200 or 300. Mind you, when you're doing this, the bees are still crawling around. So they're not real good at settling in right at the line and telling you, yep, that's how many you have. So it is a little bit of a ballpark guesstimate. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Once you get them in there, they suggest sloshing them around a little bit. That first little whiff of alcohol kind of loosens them up, and then you can get the cover on. And once you get the cover on, then they either recommend just the really tippy thing or the washing machine method. And by doing this, and so they give us, remove the lid, add some of the fluid, pull the frame out of your hive. Now you're going to get those bees into this cup. So it's got 200 or 300 bees, and you'll be able to figure out your numbers from there. And then you want to shake it gently so that it's going to cause them to, stay in for you. And then where they get into, after the sample is thoroughly wet, fill it to the line that they have on there. And then we get into, we're going to shake it for 60 seconds. All right. And that washing machine motion is, one, your bees are dead, your mites are dead. Dead mites don't hang on very well. So they're all just going to fall off. So we're not relying on the bees to groom them off. We're just relying on nature's, wonder alcohol, and they're dead. They don't hang on anymore. So they are going to fall down into the solution. Then we can go ahead and count how many bees are in the bottom of our solution here. So that is going to be, for some people, it's a little bit easier, straightforward, and we dump the fluid and dump the bees. They say you can actually strain that through a coffee filter. I don't know if you have a burial for the bees that didn't make it, but you then get rid of them, and now you can use the same fluid and go and do the next test and the next test. So you're not just dumping a bunch of washer fluid down next to your bees. So those are methods of testing. And again, what I hope we get is that testing is just a gathering of data. We haven't fixed our problem yet. We've only described that we might have a problem or we might not have a problem. Good data helps us make better decisions. So keeping track, knowing, okay, last year I had this kind of level, this year I have this, but even just knowing the difference between, if I test one hive, it will not have the same number as the next 3 in line. So it is important to get an idea of what those differences might be. Andy probably isn't going to test every single one of his hives. He's got too many of them. He's going to spot check them. If you have 2 hives, I would check both of them. If you have 10, I would do a sample of them. Maybe you do 5. Maybe you trade off. But you can get an idea of what your mite levels might be because they're going to be present everywhere if they're present somewhere. So I've avoided discussing how you should treat your mites because what you are going to do at the target levels of mites, and it used to be like 7 or 8 per 100 used to be the number, or was it per 200?
3 or 4.
Yeah, so 3 or 4 per 100 was your number, like, we should be doing something here. There's a lot of stuff that I'm reading that people indicate that any level of mite is something you should be doing something about. What you do is entirely dependent on your philosophy of beekeeping. Some people have decided, I don't want to put anything that's not completely natural in my hive, and maybe not even anything that's completely natural at naturally occurring levels. So they've decided that they want to be probably what you would call treatment-free. Other people is going to be, they're looking to say, you know what, I'm going to do whatever it takes. So your beekeeping philosophy is going to determine what you will do. Yeah?
Well, when do you suggest testing?
I would say spring. Even when you get new packages, you can figure out, did they come with, once they get settled in, what are my mite loads in the spring, midsummer, and then fall. So after you pull the honey supers is oftentimes when you can apply a lot of the more aggressive treatments. There are some treatments that can be applied while the honey supers are on, but most things you want to avoid just to avoid any risk of contaminating your honey. So a sidebar in here is if you do check for your mite levels, consider participating in some of the data gathering efforts that are out there in order to help get a better handle of what is the scope of the problem, how regional is it, and the data that we're using in these studies will help provide better results and possibly new or less dangerous ways of treating mites, dangerous to us or dangerous to bees. One of those is Mite Check. University of Michigan, University of Maryland, College Park, and the Bee Informed partnership. So Mite Check is, they go in and they send you an email, you pop up the link, here it is, you've got a form. This is how many hives I have, this is what my mite levels were, this is where I am. They have, the Bee Informed partnership has some end of the year surveys where they ask how many bees survived this year, how many did you lose during the winter, how many did you lose during the spring, and they kind of gather that data to say what were the national hive loss statistics. And they start to make conclusions from that. So, you know, this many people said, I didn't treat or do anything for mites. They ask, did you test for mites? And they kind of extrapolate from that, like, okay, well, here's a lot of people who lost hives and none of them checked for mites. So we can't tell if it was mites or it wasn't mites, but we know that number, higher numbers of people who aren't checking, we're losing bees and we don't know why. So participating in some of that data helps us do more than just fix or address our own problem. It really helps us be part of that greater beekeeping community and provide some of that data for these researchers and help them draw some bigger conclusions. So you could be, I stole this, it's got their copyright right on it, so I promise I at least give them credit, but it was too cute to pass up. So this could be your philosophy that, you know, just say no. Or you could fall into this camp. Just burn them all. Anything it takes, get rid of the mites. I thought he was awesome. So I had to use it. I had to find a way to put it in there. One of the things, regardless of which side of the mite treatments you fall down on, integrated pest management. It's that idea that everything we do is to help manage the whole ecosystem of our bees. So location matters. They find in data that hives in full sun have less mites than hives that are maybe in full shade. They also have found that that extra temperature seems to help in southern states to prevent a lot of small hive beetle. And it's not as bad, but they still have a big problem with it. But down in, you know, down south, they put them in the shade and they have hive beetles coming out their ears. The other part of this is figuring out what do genetics play into this? Can we get queens and can we produce stock that's going to have a higher hygienic tendency? So hygienic meaning they're either going to pull those larvae that are overly infected in a cell and they're going to get rid of them before those mites have a chance to hatch out, or are they going to be, there's ankle biters, and they actually go through and they groom each other more aggressively in the presence of mites, and they get rid of them more often. So then, if we have a screened bottom board, the mites fall through the screen, they don't crawl back up onto the bees. If we have a sticky board, then they're stuck on the bottom and you remove them. And that was one of the points that he made about sticky boards in your towns. Ants tend to like mites too. It's apparently a snack. And so they will come in and take them off of your sticky board. So before you can count them, they are gone. They were there, but they're gone now. So it is one of those things you kind of have to assume there's a few mites that landed on that board that you didn't find. So screened bottom boards are part of integrated pest management. Whether or not you use a sticky board, that screened bottom board is allowing those mites that are groomed off of the bees to fall through and out of the hive. Especially if your bottom follower board is completely pulled out. The mites fall down and now they don't have time or the ability to get back up into the hive and do more damage. So there are, you know, your potions, lotions, and powders that a lot of people have come up with. You can read on the internet. People have tried everything. I was on a board recently and someone came and asked, they use a tincture of mercury for everything that their child has in any ailment, and mercury helps their immune system, and it might work great in people, but they suggested that how would I give the mercury to my bees? They were kind of rather roundly disabused of that notion, and maybe not so kindly, but it didn't seem to sit real well with the older beekeepers that we would introduce mercury in any form to our beehives and honey that we might want to eat. So, depending on where you get your information, depending on who you trust, and find some people that you do trust. Find an older beekeeper who has a philosophy that's similar to yours and ask them questions. Figure that out, because you can ask, Andy's phrase is always, you can ask 10 beekeepers a question, you will get 11 answers. Everybody is going to have a different opinion. We all have experience of some level with this, and so, oh, this worked for me, or oh, I did this, and then, you know, I painted my hives yellow, and I've never had a problem since. The color of your hive may not have had anything to do with it, but without data, we don't know. So try and stick with approved mite treatments or approved mite practices. Figure out, somebody has done the research and said, yes, if you do this, this will cause this to happen and you will have less mites over this method. There's a lot of things you can try. There's a guy out there who made a solar hive. It's basically a solar cooker that you put on top of your hive, raises the temperature to like 120 degrees, and they swear that they have no more mites. I don't know how many bees they have left, but they've done research. I just haven't, decided that I was going to buy one of those. So a lot of the approved mite treatments are actually compounds that are found in nature. There's some, is it formic that's in rhubarb?
Formic and xylic are natural.
Yeah. So some of them are actually found in rhubarb, and then we just concentrate them, put them on a plastic sheet that has a controlled release. Apivar is one of them. Pop them in the hive. And then there's other Apigard and a few others that are formic acid. And you can do your research. You can figure out what you're comfortable with. And so tonight, what I thought, we've established that mites are a problem. Testing is essential. And if you manage your mites before they manage you, you won't be chasing that curve. Because a lot of us who have had bees for a few years can point to, well, I didn't get this done in the fall, and I didn't treat that hive, and that hive didn't make it. Or I didn't prepare that hive the way I intended to, and they didn't make it. So when you get behind the curve, it's hard to catch up. So the encouragement is, if you've never tested, figure out what you're going to do and say, I want to test my bees. If you do start testing, we have a Facebook group. We would love to hear from you that, hey, I did my first mite test. I would like to hear that just to see what you found and what were your problems? How did it work well for you? Did it not work well for you? Was corralling a half a cup of bees the most difficult task you've ever contemplated with stinging insects? I don't know. I always suit up. I'm not gonna lie. I don't like getting stung, so I am not a t-shirt beekeeper like someone I know. So please, go with what you're comfortable with, but we really should be. So there is the table. When we hit the discussion period, you will find treatments and someone who knows how to treat. And we will also have a table over here that is treatment free. And my buddy Scott is going to kind of head that one up. So whatever your preference is, if you want to go to both, that's okay. We're all right with that. And the poster's not going to stay long. But figure it out. Ask some questions. See what would work for you in the environment that you're in how many bees you have, and what your beekeeping goals are. So that's kind of the biggest thing. I've got the sources of where I pulled a lot of this information. So if somebody's really interested in figuring out how wrong I was and everything I've shared, it's here. There are some great YouTube videos on people doing the sugar test method. I didn't want to show any of them because most of YouTube videos, especially beekeeping ones I found, are about 14 minutes long, and they do stuff that's important for about 2 minutes of it. So we would be waiting a long time for them to get to the actual action, which is also why I didn't want to stand up here and even with raisins and pretend to do all these tests for you. It just wouldn't have been pretty. Question?
Kathy.
Oh, missed it, sorry. Yes.
I've read in a couple of the IPM articles that if you have a swarm split, that helps in mite control because you have that break and brood.
Yes. So the life cycle of the Varroa mite is tied directly to the life cycle of your bee. So right before that larva is going to be capped, that older Varroa mother is going to go in there and she's going to lay the eggs, and they're going to grow while that larva is developing. So in secret, they take care of that. If we have a brood break where there is no brood for them to go into, that mother mite can't last that long. The bees are going to outlive her. So her lifespan is such that when she's ready to lay her eggs and there's no fresh larva for her to do that in, that creates a void in their life production cycle. So it's unlikely that's going to eliminate all of the mites, but it is going to significantly cut down on the number of mites in your hive. So a brood break through a split, through your queen either dying, being swarmed out, whatever, that 21 days or something where there's not going to be brood in there is enough to cause the number of mites to drop radically. So it is a method of controlling those mites and keeping them under those thresholds. But I don't think that you can, I mean, that works great during the summer. Come fall, that's not going to work because you're not going to have a new queen. You can't split them very well in the fall. So it's a method of doing that, but it's not going to work for you year round. And if there are mites going into fall, there will be a lot of mites throughout the winter. So they will overmatch your bees. They're going to shorten their life cycle. So the number of bees that you have at the beginning of fall, when the queen really shuts down, that's what you're trying to ride. So it's a war of attrition. So those bees have to last all the way through spring. And if they're being sucked, the hemolymph, they're being vampired by these little mites all winter, that's going to shorten their lifespan. And the more bees you lose, it's basically each bee represents a certain amount of heat in that hive. And if you fall below that threshold where they can keep that cluster warm, it's going to fail. So that's why mites are so hard on winter bees. Any other questions?
Do the bees groom the queen to keep her free of mice?
I've not heard of that one.
Oh, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know that they groom her any more aggressively than they would any other bees, but I have seen pictures of mites on a queen bee. So, yes?
How many bees did you measure out to test again?
It depends on your method. A lot of the sugar shake ones go 200 bees.
And you used a 1 cup measure?
Half cup.
Half cup measure?
So that's, I think, a half cup is about 200 bees. So this one goes, you can do 200 or 300 to the marks, and then you just divide to get your number per 100 in mites. So oftentimes the number is reported as number of mites per 100 bees, and you sample more than 100 just to kind of help you get a better average.
And what was the mite threshold?
Well, that's still up for grabs, but 3 to 4, and you probably have a problem. But for some people, any number of mites is something to watch out for. To say, where are we at, and how do I make sure that I'm not leaving this just go? So if it's the middle of summer, or you have your honey supers on, you're like, okay, what can I do? Or I know, here's what I'm going to do when I pull my honey supers off. This is what we're going to do to knock the mites down. Am I going to treat with oxalic acid vapor? Am I going to do something that is, one of these other ideas? But if you have a serious mite problem and you don't do something about it, you will likely lose that hive. So keeping those mites in check is probably your best bet to avoiding having to use any stronger measures. So figuring that out and how you do everything, figure out what am I comfortable with, how often can I see my bees. Some people's bees are quite far away from where they are. They have them in the cabin up north or wherever. Some people's bees are in their backyard and they can go see them every 2 days. So yeah.
So keep in mind, this is a question from someone who has no bees yet. But I've read that wild bees, so to speak, are starting to get some sort of resistance. And so in theory, if you were to bait some of those bees to your hive, they would have better likelihood than if you purchase bees. Is there truth to that?
It really depends, because a lot of wild bees are the swarm that came from somebody's package this year. So you don't know how wild they are or where they actually came from. Truly wild bees that have survived over several years have obviously developed some means of either being protected from it, they're isolated enough, or they've developed enough grooming habits that they are able to do that. There are some anecdotes from places like South Africa where they had the mite problem come in. They said, we're not going to do these advanced, we're not going to treat all these hives. The commercial industry said, no, here's what we're going to do. We're going to just, try and manage through this. They lost a lot of hives. Their commercial industry sucked for a few years. And now they're seeing that the bees are handling that and they've become just a problem like beetles. So the ultimate goal is that the bees should be able to handle this, that we would like the genetics to come along and be able to selectively raise good stock that isn't as susceptible to the mites and helps them deal with it, so that we aren't forced to use, or beekeepers don't feel like they're forced to use stronger methods. So yes, that's the goal. I think it would be, for me, it's similar to a farmer who says, I bought 100 cattle. I need to get the milk out of these cattle. He's got an investment there, and he may not be a genetic specialist. So for him to, out of his 100, think he's going to get that silver bullet, cow that has none of these other diseases is difficult, and he's hoping for the best out of what he's got. If we can provide more data to universities and breeders and some of these places that are actually working on the idea of how do I selectively raise these kinds of queens with this kind of insemination, I think that's going to be probably some of the best results we're going to see in the future of beekeeping. Hopefully are going to come out of that genetic breeding stock that's happening. And there's people who have isolated apiaries, and they raise some really strong bees that are really acclimated to northern temperatures and really seem to do well with mites. And so if you can find someone who provides bees like that, give it a try. We've got several people in our club who are very strong into finding different genetic strains and acquiring those queens and seeing how they work for them. And that's their method of addressing their mite problems. So.
Yeah, part of the survivor stock that's being raised these days is based on the Russian bees, which tolerate the mites a lot better. Good honey producers. I've been in my Russians in a t-shirt, back when I had them. But they're going on and on trying to breed and interbreed to get that survivor stock that will last without chemicals. And I think they do it for a while, and then as they breed out, then you have more and more problems. There's no magic pill right now, but there are some people, Kirk Webster up in Vermont, there's some folks in Iowa, out in Oklahoma and some other places that are having some success. And if you buy their bees, it's a little, costs a little more, but you're going to have a lot better luck with mites.
Yeah.
Has anybody tried using the insect fogger with the oxalic acid yet? Around
I
here,
haven't.
here?
I've seen that.
You tried it?
I haven't tried it, but there were people in the club that were doing it, I think about 6 years ago or so. And I don't know where it went, but I was busy moving in kind of other directions.
So with oxalic acid, the current method and the dribble method and the sublimation, which is you heat that crystalline form until it gases out. Those are the two approved methods by the Department of Agriculture, DATCP, stands for something. The fogging method, you don't know how much you're dosing, so it's harder to say how much oxalic acid crystalline is actually being introduced into the hive at that dose rate for how many squeezes do I do. It's less exact, so I haven't seen data on that where they've said, yep, this is an approved form of doing this. I've seen some guys mix up the solution, pour it in, and they do it. If you do oxalic acid, take your precautions. It sucks to breathe in. It's really hard on your lungs. It's not good for you. So it is in gaseous form. It's strong, and so you need to take the proper precautions for the stuff that you're using. So when we concentrate this stuff, it is not that hard on bees. It doesn't affect their respiratory system. It's harder on the mites than it is on the bees, and so it's effective in that sense. But take the proper precautions for the stuff that you're using.
There's been a problem over the years with beekeepers. When the mites showed up, they were throwing everything at it, including the kitchen sink. Well, there went that hive, but you're soaking paper towels in a solution of chemical, and you're taking one of those out, putting it on the top of the hive, putting the cover over, going to the next hive. One gentleman put some chemical of some kind in his smoker and was applying it that way. He got deathly sick breathing those fumes. So I don't know what happened to the bees. Sometimes like Brett said, you're playing with the amounts, and you have to be very careful not to overwhelm the bees. We've had the atomizing mineral oil and spraying it all over the hive, and my first thought was, well, I've played with that, and what you're going to have is the inside of a hive covered with mineral oil. And I don't think the bees are going to be real happy. Everybody claimed, oh no, it doesn't build up. So okay, where does that go? So they're doing all kinds of things to try and help the hive, and in reality they're not really helping the hive or the bees. So you have to be careful. And when I've got a number of mite medications up there, you really should read the directions. Okay, guys, if you're married, have your wife oversee you so that you actually read the directions.
You're supposed to turn them over, right?
Yeah.
So I just did something a little fun. So I plotted a distribution of if you had 200 bees and you had 3% of them have mites, of what the distribution looks like of how many you'd actually count. And it's pretty interesting that 30% of the time, and note on average you'd get 6 bees that you would count. 30% of the time you'd have 3 or fewer, or about 8 or more. So you actually, even if you did everything right, and you had the perfect, exactly 200 bees, and you, did the sugar roll and you got it to work 100%, just know there's a lot of variability in how many mites you'll actually count. So if anybody's curious, you can swing by later and see it.
So it may not still
Yeah.
be accurate.
Have you ever done the drone brood frame method where,
Culling the drone brood.
right,
Yeah, you can pull a frame of mostly drone brood, you freeze it, and that kills it, and you remove it from the hive. Mites are supposed to have an affinity to drone brood versus other types of brood. That would reduce your mite levels by whatever mites you killed in the drone brood. It doesn't address the mites that will be resident in the other brood. There's some percentage less of them are in that other brood, so maybe they're not at equal strength in each of those two varieties, but there's still enough there that it's that seed amount of mites. So I mean, there is something there, and I think a long time, maybe still, but I mean, a lot of people look at drones and go, we don't need them. They don't do anything for my hive, so I have too many drones, I'll get rid of them. Your bees thought they needed those drones for some reason. Those drones are what's supplying good solid genetics for virgin queens that are getting mated up here that can survive up here. So, you know, we're kind of cutting into the genetic diversity if we kill a lot of drones. But, you know, it is a method. It will do something for you. I just don't know, and maybe I didn't make a good slide for it, but once you decide what you're going to do, or as you go throughout the summer, you need to test again. So if I test and I find I have a level of mites I need to do something about, I do something. If that's a treatment, if that's, you know, some other form of integrated pest management, I added a sticky board, I added something, then I need to test again. I need to say, what did that do for me? Am I getting to the direction that I want to go in? Do I have less mites or do I have more mites? So test, find your solution or the action you're going to take, and then retest. Figure out, did it work? So, yeah.
Is there a value in pulling the drones to see how many mites are on the larva as far as an indicator for numbers?
I do that when I'm extracting because I usually get a couple of drone brood up on the honey supers, so I skewer them with my capping scratcher. And over the years, that has told me a lot. When I bring in the honey from the Russians and fork that out, you know, out of a dozen drones, I got maybe 1 or 2 mites. If I had my Italians and did the same thing, I mean, virtually all the drones would have mites, and they're, you know, relatively close to each other, same conditions growing up. But I had one last year where there were a lot of mites in the yard. Holy cow. And in fact, the sticky board there is from that after I treated. But I still had honey supers on, so that white tub, the big white tub there, has got formic acid strips. And if you open that up, do not take a good deep breath. It is really pungent. But yeah, because of the drones, the mites that were on the drones, I put the Mite Away Quick strips on all the hives in that yard. So yeah, it's a good indicator, kind of anecdotal, but hey, I'm going with it.
A guy like Andy, who has a lot of hives and a lot of experience in those hives, he probably has a nose for mites. He's going to open this hive up and he's going to say, based on what I see on the brood comb, based on what I see here, I have a mite problem, or maybe I don't have that much of a mite problem. Your experience level is going to be able to give you some impressions, but the testing for a lot of us who don't have those years of experience or that many hives, testing is going to give you a hard number. So you can use your senses, you can use your observations, you can use all those things. But backing those up with a test, you now can correlate, okay, when I see this, that was a high mite number. You know, oh, wait a minute, I see all this going on that I think is bad, and I test, well, I don't have that many mites, so it might be something else. So, you know, test, verify, observe, all those things. We want to be detailed about this. We're taking care of livestock. We want them to live. So taking the best, you know, you watch your kids, you watch what they eat, you watch their color in the morning, you see their activity, you take care of them. We're responsible for taking care of our bees, so we want to manage them well.
Thank you.